Thank you, Rosanna. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I'm a member of the Toastmasters Club in Niantic, Connecticut, and I'm also a member of the League of Women Voters, which is a national organization made up of all sorts of people from around the country. And we're very interested in getting everybody to vote. Do you all know what voting is? Have you heard of that before? Emma says yes. Okay. Okay. So the League of Women Voters was formed in the year 1920. So do you know how old we are as an organization?
100.
Correct. Very good. That's the hardest question that I'll ask you. Okay, and it was formed then to help women learn how to use the vote to make changes in our laws. Women in the 1920s felt that the laws weren't fair to them, and they were also worried about some other things, and they wanted laws to protect their children, because children at that age could go to work in a factory at the age of 8. They could leave school and go work in a factory for long hours every day, and they wanted those laws changed so that children had to go to school and couldn't work in factories. They cared about access to education for girls, because at that time most girls weren't allowed to go to college. They cared about banking laws, because a lot of these women wanted to start their own business, but they couldn't because they couldn't get a loan from a bank. So what topics do you think are important to voters today? You can put it in the chat box if you want. What do you think people care about? Go voting. What's on their mind? Presidents? Do you think that they're caring about health care or education? Jobs, environment, healthcare, agriculture, good. Supreme Court Justice, yes. And they're thinking about who should be their representative. Well, that's great. Well, although the League of Women Voters is not partisan, that means that we don't support a certain candidate or a certain party. We do take stands on issues that we care about, like global war, like climate change, and like voter rights, voter access. And so we take stands on those issues and try to get our elected officials to make laws that will govern us the way we think we should be governed. We are inclusive. In other words, despite our name, the League of Women Voters, we actually welcome anybody who's interested in democracy. People of all genders, races, creeds. We understand that in a democracy, we need to hear everyone's voice. We believe that everyone has a reason for their opinion, and we trust that we all have the same goal of making America as good as it can be. When Americans work together and treat one another with respect, we can develop solutions to our problems that work for all of us. Now, within America, there are so many different kinds of groups of people, but we all have to cooperate. So, how many different groups of people can you think of in America who have to learn to get along together? Like my grandparents came from Poland, so I'm going to say Polish people, or I could also say woman. What groups of Americans can you think of? Chinese, yep. British, African Americans, Japanese, African Americans, Native Americans, good, and Americans. Yeah, you can see that there's a lot of diversity in our country. We have to find a way for so many different people to come together and make laws so that we can live comfortably together. Now, in 1787, in Philadelphia, the Constitution of the United States was adopted. Now, this is only the size of my hand and 32 pages long. And this has been around since 1787, helping us get along together. Remember, at that time, those settlers in America had been ruled by a king, and they were not happy being ruled by a king. So they invented a whole new way of government. People call the United States an experiment in democracy because it was such a unique way of running a country. The Constitution introduced the idea of ordinary people voting for their leaders. Now, if we think of voting at all, I think we just take it for granted as one of our rights as Americans. But that way of thinking is a luxury, and one that we didn't work to have. It's an inherited gift from the people who have gone before us. My grandparents, and maybe yours too, came to this country so that we would have a better life, a freer life. Almost all of us have family histories that started somewhere else, but they came to America by choice because of her promise. Now, in the Constitution's first draft in 1787, only white men who owned property were allowed to vote. And that represented only about 10% of the population. And they limited authority of even those voters by creating a group called the Electoral College, so that if the voters elected somebody completely inappropriate, the Electoral College could veto that and not let that happen. But over the years, different groups protested because everyone wanted the vote. Now, the first people to get the vote after this Constitution were Black men, and that came after the Civil War in the 1860s. Black men were allowed to vote. And then it was 60 years later that women were allowed to vote. But state laws made that so that only white women could vote. And even though the blacks and the white women were given the vote then, they were really discouraged from going to the polls. They were intimidated, they had to pay a poll tax, they had to pass reading tests, they had to recite parts of the Constitution in order to vote. And so really, even though they were legally allowed to vote, it was really hard for them to actually do it. But in 1965, when I was in 8th grade, another law was passed, the Civil Rights Act. And that finally included Native Americans. For the first time, got to vote in America in 1965. And that also included, for the first time, Americans of Asian descent. And it also included Black women. We're pretty happy with those changes. But now people are talking about changing the voting age from 18 to 16. And I wonder what you think of that. If you could vote on that, would you vote yes or no? Should 16-year-olds be allowed to vote? Tell me in the chat room. Emma says yes. No, I see no, no, no. Yes. Jaden really thinks no. Okay. Well, I guess not too many think that 16-year-olds should be allowed to vote. So now that all Americans over the age of 18 can vote, each state's in charge of writing the guidelines for your state. So the laws vary from state to state. Have you ever been to your town hall? Do you know where it is? Your city hall or town hall? Yes. Okay. Well, in there, there's an office called the registrar, the registrar of voters, and you go in there when you turn 18 to register to vote. When you go to register to vote, they'll ask you if you want to be a member of a political party. Now, you've probably heard about Democrats and Republicans, but there are other smaller parties too. If you register to be a member of a party, you'll be allowed to vote in the primary elections. And that determines who will be the candidate to represent your party in the general election. You might remember that a year ago, there were 20 Democrats running for president, and Joe Biden had to run in these primary elections around the country, and he won the nomination for the Democratic Party. But if you're in a party, you can quit and switch to another party at any time. So once you're in, it's not a permanent thing. All you have to do is go back to the registrar and say you want to change parties. So once the final candidates have been named in the nomination process, the general election is held, and that's always the first Tuesday in November, according to the rules in the Constitution. And during the general election, you can vote for any candidate you like, even if they're not in your party. And there are two ways to vote: in person and a mail-in ballot or an absentee ballot. But I'm going to talk a little bit about voting in person right now. Where you go to vote is called a polling place, and it's typically a public building in your town, like your school or your library. When you walk into the polling place, there will be sample ballots on the wall, and there's a person there called the polling monitor. And if you have any questions at all, you can ask the polling monitor. If you have any problem, go to the polling monitor and they will solve your problem. For example, if someone is blind, they might need some help getting their ballot filled out. If somebody is disabled, they're allowed to bring a helper in with them to the polling place. Or if someone has difficulty speaking English, they can bring a translator with them. When you enter the polling place, you'll see tables and voting machines. And at the table for your electoral district, you'll be asked to sign your name, and they'll check that against your signature when you first registered to vote to make sure that it's really you. You don't need to bring any identification with you. They'll just match your signature. You'll then be handed a ballot, which you take to a private booth to fill out. No one else ever sees your ballot. The only mark that you make on your ballot should be in the little bubbles next to your candidate's name. Fill in the little bubbles like you're taking a standardized test with either blue or black ink. Don't make any other marks on the ballot. If you make a mistake, you can ask for another ballot. They'll give you another one. So it's okay to admit that you've made a mistake and ask for another ballot. It happens all the time. But I want to assure you that no one else will ever see your ballot. Voting in the United States is secret. No one has the right to know how you voted. You then take your ballot over to this machine and you feed it in, and it swallows up your ballot, and the votes are mechanically counted. And the voting machines are not connected to the internet, so they can't be hacked. Okay, so now, even though you can't vote yet because you're too young, you can still have influence. And this is my call to action to you. I want you to try to convince all the voters in your life to go and vote, whether it's your parents, your teachers, your neighbors. And It's not a time to argue with anyone, but just ask simple questions like, are you registered to vote? How are you going to vote? By in-person or mail-in ballots? And if they give you reasons for why they don't want to vote, just listen to them and respect their opinion. But then if you have some facts to offer them, you can. Like say they say, well, I don't really know too much about the candidates. You can tell them to go to vote411.org. And that's the League of Women Voters site. And we have little paragraphs about each candidate so they can see which candidate they like. But in the League, we say that democracy is not a spectator sport. We really need everyone to participate in this. If they think that their vote doesn't matter, tell them that lots of elections are very, very close. Sometimes won just by 1 or 2 votes. So it's really important that they go. They might think, oh, the person I like is going to win anyway. It doesn't matter. But if everybody thinks that way, then that person might lose. So it's really important to vote. In closing, I want you to remember our vote is very powerful. Never doubt that. It's our voice, it's our right, it's our privilege, and it's our duty to our country. Together, our votes shape the future of our country and the world. Remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. As soon as you turn 18, go register to vote. Any questions? Yes, Jaden, unmute yourself.
Oh, how old are you? You look very old.
I'm 69.
Oh my God.
I know, and I've been voting.
Obama's father just died in 1982 at age, I forgot.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sure you missed that person.
Yeah, I forgot it. I just read it on the National Geographic book.
Yeah. Any other questions about voting?
I have a question.
Yes, Sky.
When did you join the League of Women Voters?
I joined the League of Women Voters in 1977.
That's a really long time.
A really long time. Ariana?
Yeah. Why do you have to register to vote?
Why do you have to register to vote? Good question. Because you're only allowed to vote if you are over, when you go to register, they're going to make sure that you are a citizen of the United States, that you're over 18 years old, and that you haven't already registered in another city or another place, because you can only vote once. So they want to make sure that you are who you say you are, and that you live where you really live.
So you have to register each time you go to vote?
Oh, no, you only register once, and then from then on, unless you move to another address, you don't ever have to register again. But if you move to another address, then you need to register again.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Okay, well, have a great Toastmasters meeting. And thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Joanne, for being here. That was very informative, and we've talked a lot about voting on our website. If you visit it, it's ncgavelclub.org. We also have resources and infographics, and we have subtitles on our videos in Chinese if your parents don't understand English. So definitely check out the website Joanne mentioned if you want to know more about the different candidates, and then also visit our website if you want to see like how to register to vote. I think it's too late to register to vote, but how you can vote today. Cool, thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, Joanne. All right, bye. Thank you for being here.